Being present in life begins with the concept of optimizing your physical, mental, and psychological potential. However, for men, a recent national survey published by Medical News Today found that a third of men in the United States don't see a prevalent need for yearly checkups or working out or prioritizing their health on a regular basis. The survey also revealed that 13.2% of men in the United States who are 18 years or older are in fair or poor health. Daniel Kelly is on a global mission to change the way that men view the importance and priority of their physical and mental health. He spent his days as a health and lifestyle optimization coach. He's an author and biohacker working with high performance men from all over the world. He helps men to optimize their lifestyles to gain more energy and focus so that they can gain the time back to be better people, fathers, leaders, and husbands. He helps his clients to create deep health audits, which is a blueprint and a detailed report intended to help them achieve optimal well-being based on a deep analysis of blood and urine tests. And Kelly is someone who knows about making pivots in life. Prior to his stint as a health coach, he spent some time as an investment banker, and he knew that he wanted to do more to help people after seeing those in his life struggle with optimizing their health. And now, Kelly is in a position where he wants to share his knowledge, expertise, and years in the field with all of you to help men all over the world do everything they can to optimize their health, wealth, and well-being from a financial, physical, and psychological standpoint. And Kelly joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Daniel, so if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to hear how you help men level up in their optimizing and health journey. Great to see you today, and thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. I'm very excited to have a conversation with you today.
Absolutely. Now, Daniel, I know that you help men sort of optimize their energy levels and optimize their health in every aspect of life because I know you're a health and optimization coach. And I'm curious to start our conversation asking you about your journey to where you got today and what makes you so fabulous, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So I guess it could start out with after finishing university, I went to work in investment banking, and I worked in places like Barclays and Goldman Sachs, so big multinational banks. And during my time in investment banking, I used to work very long hours, but I saw a lot of my colleagues who were basically train wrecks. by the time that they reached their 40s. And I knew I didn't want to be one of them because of the stresses of the job, the long hours, the commutes, all of these things eventually take their toll on you. And what I found was a lot of my colleagues were struggling to stay in shape and deal with the pressures of their job. And many of them were very wealthy and successful, but they didn't have the ultimate wealth, which I think is health. And so I was determined, after seeing the people that I worked with, that I didn't want to end up the same way. So I spent a lot of time in my early and mid-20s researching health and wellness, tried all sorts of workouts, supplements, training regimens, diets, you name it, I tried it. And these days it's called biohacking, right? And so I experimented with a lot of stuff. And then eventually I started doing blood testing on a regular basis. And one day I took a routine blood test at the age of 28, and I discovered I had the testosterone levels of an 80-year-old man. And this was even though I was doing everything quote unquote right. I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't smoke, didn't take drugs. So generally I treat my body like a temple, and yet I still had a very, very low testosterone level for my age. And the blood test was kind of good for me because it validated many of the symptoms that I'd been experiencing, but I'd kind of ignored and normalized up until that point. I realized that I was actually struggling with anxiety in a big way, like daily anxiety. I was kind of depressed. Had mood swings. My energy was low. My libido was non-existent. And I put so much effort into the gym, but I didn't get much out of it. And I realized a lot of this was down to having low testosterone. So I did a lot of research into it. And ultimately, my long story short, I decided to go on testosterone replacement therapy, which kind of gave me my life back in many ways. But in some ways, it wasn't everything I expected it to be. And I thought it would give me more energy and drive and stuff like that. But some things it didn't improve for me. And what I discovered was that actually there were so much things I could improve with my diet, with my sleep, the way I handled stress. But no one had ever taught me these things, that I never knew them. And so what I decided to do is to quit my job in investment banking and start my own men's health coaching business, because there was so much stuff that I'd learned for myself that I knew that no one else really understood, because I'd tried and experimented all these things. And so I wanted to share with men how to improve their health in a more holistic, simple way, rather than trying all of these things that society tells you that you need to do and in fact you don't need.
Yeah, and then I'm curious to ask you about emotional health, and really the emotional journey you went on when you went on that sort of testosterone therapy, and the emotional journey that you went on. And tell me about the importance of men really being vulnerable in order to grow. How important do you think that is?
Yeah, so in terms of growth and in terms of quality of life in general, I think emotional health is extremely important. And I think it's only recent research that demonstrates that emotional intelligence is as important, if not more important, than general IQ that we're taught about in school, right? So intellectual quotient, right? At school, we're basically taught about the intellect, how to memorize, how to learn math equations, scientific formulations, but rarely does anyone actually teach us how to manage our emotions properly. And particularly as men, we're programmed by society to deal with our emotions either one or two ways, either repression or suppression, right? So in the form of stuffing it down and ignoring it, or trying to suppress it with alcohol, food, Netflix, or some form of drugs, or some form of escapism, right? And so neither of those are very healthy ways of dealing or regulating your emotions. But if no one ever teaches you how to use them or how to manage them properly, because you're taught that showing any emotion is kind of weak, then obviously it's not really going to be conducive to your overall health. And so what I find is that a lot of men, once they learn how to understand and process emotions in a very healthy way, they feel less stressed, they sleep better, they lose weight a lot easier, and everything is a lot easier and simpler, and they feel a lot less overall pressure, and they can go about life in a more lighter way. And so it's not about necessarily showing or expressing your emotions. It's more about understanding how to regulate them and process them. And I think that actually an important part of being able to regulate your emotions is getting the fundamentals of health and wellness right, which is actually watching what you eat. So you avoid like emotional ups and downs, roller coasters with your blood sugar. Managing your mindset, the way that you're thinking, and being aware of the way that you're thinking, and regular exercise. Do a lot of these things, and this will go a long way to mitigating these emotional ups and downs that most people experience. I think that most emotional ups and downs that people experience are due to their lifestyle, but some of it is also societal conditioning on how we're conditioned to process emotions. But it's a great question.
Yeah, and Daniel, I'm curious to also ask you your thoughts on the concept of leadership and accountability, and whether you think those two things are interconnected.
Well, I think to be a good leader, you have to be accountable, right? So if you're a good leader, then ultimately the buck stops with you, with your decisions and your choices. So I think that leadership and accountability go hand in hand. And I think that being also, even if you're a leader, doesn't mean that you can't be accountable to other people, accountable to your employees, accountable to your family, and accountable. Ultimately, the most important person to be accountable to is yourself, right? And this is something that I see a lot in health and fitness. I think that the main reason why people don't achieve their goals with health and fitness, and it's becoming increasingly a problem nowadays, which I think more than half the population, for example, in the United States is considered obese. I think it's not because people are on the wrong diet or because they don't exercise regularly. I think it's because people aren't holding themselves accountable and sticking to their word, and they're breaking their promises that they make to themselves. So diet starts on Monday. How many times has anyone watching this said that to themselves? Or have you told that to yourself, right? I'll start my diet next week. Oh, tomorrow I'll put it off. And then tomorrow comes and you don't do it. So I think there's a strong correlation with doing what you say you do and actually getting results with regards to your health and fitness.
Yeah, and Daniel, I'm also wondering your thoughts on the process of eliminating distractions. What do you think the key is to eliminating distractions?
Well, it's a great question, Kevin. I think that in today's day and age, which I would probably call it the age of distraction, it's one of the biggest challenges that most people face is to be less distracted and to be focused on something. So I think that the way, certainly in my experience, the way that I found to eliminate distraction is twofold. The first one is getting a lot of clarity on what it is that you actually want. I think it's very easy to get distracted when you don't know what you want and you haven't given it any thought. And when you actually it's surprising when you speak to people how many people don't actually think about what they really want for their life. Because what's happened is that when we're younger, we are conditioned very early on to think that our dreams aren't achievable, that I can't have what I want because, oh, well, that's not, your teacher tells you that's not realistic. You should do this instead, or your parents say, or your people around you say you can't do this. And so we get into the habit then of postponing or not really thinking about what we really want because we don't believe it's possible for us. So therefore, we don't actually take the time to think about what we really want. So I think that if you actually take the time to think about what is it I really want, it helps you get more focus to be distracted. And then once you've decided what you want, it is important to have a singularity of focus and focus on that one thing and that one thing only. And then the second thing is simply not to have your phone near you when you're doing important tasks.
Well, yeah, that was my next question in terms of how do you think social media and the social distraction of life has really played into sort of the fabric of society, and how do you think we can create better habits to get off social media and get active, not only physically, but also optimizing our life potential as well?
Great question, Kevin. So I don't know if there's one clear-cut answer because everyone is different. But I do know that smartphones and social media apps in particular are specifically designed and engineered to keep you addicted to them and using them on a regular basis. Therefore, you can always tell yourself, I'll be more disciplined and I'll spend less time on my phone. But I think that like any addiction, smartphone addiction, we'll call it for what it is, smartphone or social media addiction. It's like having food in your house. If you have food in your house that's junk food and let's say candy bars or chocolate or whatever, if it's there, you're going to eat it. So I always tell clients, instead of having to use your willpower and temptation, just remove it from the house in the first place. Then you won't have the temptation to do it because you're only human. And it's much the same with a phone. It's like crack cocaine. If it's there, you're going to want to use it, right? So I think that the mantra out of sight, out of mind is quite a much easier way to deal with smartphones that I found in my life. Like, for example, if you're one of those people, and many people are, who looks at their phone before they go to bed, simply getting into the habit of keeping it outside of your room will keep it from out of your sight. And then you'll feel that time that you would normally spend on scrolling Instagram or whatever, doing something productive like reading a book or just actually going to sleep on time, like you said you would. right? So I'm a firm believer in you could use like for me personally, having it out of sight works best. You could try something like an app, which is going to stop you from going on a smartphone and stuff like that, but you haven't addressed the root cause, which is like the actual addiction and using the phone all the time. And like I said, they're actually designed to make us addicted to them. So the less time you spend on it, the better. Or you could go to an extreme, like one of my friends has done. He actually doesn't own a smartphone anymore, and he only has one of those old school Nokia phones, right? And so people can call him and text him. So no, he doesn't have any of those problems anymore, and he says he's more relaxed, he's more focused, he's happier. I mean, so many benefits. Everyone watching this can probably imagine what life is like without having a phone. But I would also say there's many advantages of having a phone, right? So it depends on where you're at. That's an extreme example, but I think there's a happy medium somewhere there.
Everything in moderation, right, Daniel?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Daniel, I'm also curious to ask you about optimizing potential as men, because I always believe that every one of us has sort of a life compass, and it's incumbent upon all of us to take the action steps to sort of optimize our lives. So tell me, when we talk about optimizing potential for men specifically, both in health and lifestyle, what do you think is the key to optimizing potential?
Great question, Kevin. So I think that as human beings, it's important to understand we're multifaceted. So what does that mean? We're mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. And so I think that if you only focus on one or two areas of yourself as a human being to the detriment of the other areas, and let's say that you're only nourishing, let's say your mental or your physical health, but you're neglecting your emotional and spiritual health, then you'll feel like there's something missing and you won't feel whole and rounded. So I would say that having practices or goals in your life that nourish all of those areas, and depending on what resonates with you, some of these particular areas, for example, spirituality, may not resonate with everyone, right? But I think it's an important part of a healthy, rounded human being is kind of well nourished in all of those areas. So we could say, mentally, are you working on rewiring some of the limiting beliefs that maybe you developed in childhood? Physically, are you exercising and nourishing your body on a regular basis? Let's say spirituality, are you spending time by yourself? Are you spending time out in nature? Emotionally, are you spending time with your friends and people that you care about and care about you? So I think it's important to understand how to nourish and nurture each of those areas, and making sure that those areas are getting nourished on a regular basis. And if you feel like there's something missing in your life, chances are that one of those areas is not being looked after properly.
Yeah, and Daniel, to that point, what do you think it means to take ownership of your own life and lead by example?
Ooh, great question. So Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL, is very big on this, right? So he's written a book, Extreme Ownership, which is a great book, and I think that everyone should read. And ownership, I think, ultimately means taking responsibility for your actions. And the popular narrative these days, I think, Kevin, is that many people are encouraged to be victims, and that everything is outside of their circumstance. So it's the government's fault, or it's this person's fault, is that. And I think that too many people are too often are victims in their own lives, and they don't even realize it because they've been programmed to be victims and blame other people. So I don't like to say that it's your fault, but I do like to say that it's definitely your responsibility. So if you assume that everything in your life is your responsibility, regardless of whether it's under your control or not, I think that's a much healthier framework to view life through. It doesn't mean it's your fault, because then you start judging and criticizing yourself, and your life ends up being a hell. But if you say, okay, this is my responsibility, how can I do something about it? I think that helps you take a lot more ownership for your life and realize that your life is not somebody else's. It's not to outsource to somebody else. It's yours and yours only. So it's only when you can view it through the lens of total responsibility that you can really take ownership, I think.
Yeah, and Daniel, I'm going to share just a little bit about myself. Anyone that listens or watches my podcast knows that I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. It simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. But I always tell people that, everyone's version of success is different, and that inclusion is the gateway to independence. And I know you help your clients go beyond the surface level. And, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what does it mean to go beyond the surface level and your view on inclusion and acceptance, particularly in the workforce for folks with disabilities. I wanted your thoughts there.
Sure. So going beyond the surface level, in my experience, when it comes to health and fitness, is recognizing that you're not, let's say, overweight or out of shape because of your diet or your workout plan, which is the way that most people think that's the surface level. The reason why you're out of shape or overweight is because of the way that you think and the way that you view yourself. What most people don't realize is that health and wellness is an inner game. It's not an outer one. We're conditioned in society to think that health and fitness, although you see it on the outside and you would think it's a surface level game, is very much an inner game, because the way that you think dictates your choices, and the choices that you make ultimately are going to reflect themselves on the outside in the way that your body looks, right? So we have what's called two images. You have the image on the outside, what you dress, how you groom yourself, etc., and then your weight and everything. And then you have your self-image. Your self-image is the way that you view yourself, the concept you have of yourself on the inside. And so if you have the concept of yourself as someone who's unmotivated, you're lazy, you're undisciplined, that you overeat and you can never stick to a diet, well, guess how that's going to show up in your life, right? And unfortunately, because most people don't have an understanding of what goes on beyond the surface level when it comes to health and wellness, and just how the human mind works in general, which is, in my opinion, the most important subject you'll ever study, then what happens is that they get seduced by many different types of diets. So it's one week it's the flavor of the week diet, carnivore, and then the next week it's keto, and the next week it's intermittent fasting. When in my experience, actually most diets can work, but it's more often than not, it's the person who does the diet. It's not the diet. It's how that person thinks. It's how that person lives, which is the most important. If you have a concept of yourself and a self-image of someone who's a disciplined individual, who sticks to their diet, etc., then regardless of whether you do fasting, keto, carnivore, you're still going to get some great results. So one thing I always work on with my clients, and it's probably the most important thing, is their mindset. And because the reason why they end up overweight and out of shape in the first place is because of their limiting beliefs about themselves. And so if they can create more empowering beliefs about themselves, they're going to be much more successful, and they're going to lead to lasting permanent change. And the reason why someone goes on a diet and they don't get lasting permanent change is because they haven't changed the beliefs, the limiting beliefs that got them to overweight in the first place. It has little to do with the diet. Because if you change the diet, but you don't change the inner you, the dialogue, the negative dialogue that's going on inside of your head, these limiting beliefs, then you're going to keep making the same choices. This is why people go from one diet to the next in the yo-yo diet year round, and they never have any success. And they still think it has to do with their diet when it doesn't. And regarding the inclusion, I think that, like you said, I think that everyone should be able to exercise and diet and improve their physical well-being to the best of their ability. So I don't think that should come at the exclusion of anyone's race, anyone's creed, or anything like that. And so it's very easy these days to criticize others. And to be honest, I think it's like the zeitgeist of today's world, 2023, which is like to blame a lot of our problems on others, depending on their creed, class, or color, or whatever it is. But I think that ultimately accepting oneself for who one is probably one of the most important things that I work on with my clients. And to be honest with you, though, Kevin, the word acceptance is not something that people like to. It's not really. I wouldn't say. I think it has a kind of a double-edged sword, and it has double connotations. Because for some men, it's like, oh, do I have to really accept myself? But does that mean I have to accept my situation? So the word that I like to use, I think it has a less of a negative connotation, is acknowledge. So that means being okay with myself and not necessarily having to judge myself, being my own best friend. And I think if you don't have to necessarily accept, because I'm not forcing you to accept yourself, but if you're okay with yourself and be your own best friend, and you try to coach yourself and not always beat yourself up for every minor transgression that you make, it makes life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, I'm wondering your thoughts on sustainable discipline and really creating sort of a mindset where discipline sort of is your sort of, I guess, your catalyst for staying consistent. So, what are your thoughts on creating sustainable discipline?
Yeah, so I think that discipline is a word that's got modeled up, and it's a word that invokes different meanings to different people. And so for some people, they may think that discipline means using a lot of willpower, and they may think that discipline means getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning. It means X, Y, and Z. In reality, the best definition I've ever heard of discipline is giving yourself the ability to give yourself a command and follow it. So if you don't have much discipline in the beginning when it comes to health and fitness, the good news is that it can be built up quite quickly and easily. And I believe that the key to building discipline is simplicity. So this is where most people fail, because psychologically they don't understand how the human mind works. And so every January, people go gung-ho with their health and fitness aspirations, which is, the enthusiasm is great. However, the enthusiasm and motivation eventually wanes, and they can't rely on that to get them through the January and February and March, and which is why by the end of March or the end of February, they're already done. Because if you try to go 5 days, when you're not used to exercising regularly, you go from 0 to 5 days a week. You try to go on a strict diet, and you try to impose all these restrictions on yourself, and you're not used to those kind of restrictions or that discipline, then it's going to unravel very, very quickly. So what I suggest to people is to build, you want to build the identity of someone who's a disciplined individual. So like James Clear says in his book, Atomic Habits, he says something like doing the 2-minute rule. So if you find you can't go to the gym for 30 minutes, go to the gym for 2 minutes and just spend 2 minutes there. And inevitably, more often than not, you'll find yourself doing a longer workout. But what James Clear says is it's more important to have the identity of someone who goes to the gym rather than how long you spend there. And I think that we limit ourselves and limit our ability to develop more discipline because we impose all these restrictions on ourselves and say, oh, well, if I don't go to the gym for 45 minutes, then it's a waste. If I don't eat perfectly, then it's a waste, where you're missing an opportunity to be a disciplined person. And discipline is a skill, and it's like a muscle that you have to develop and exercise on a regular basis, right? So I think that opportunities to exercise your discipline on a regular basis, whether it's a small or a minor thing, is going to build that and exercise that discipline muscle. So I think that people make it too hard for themselves by imposing massive restrictions that they're not already used to. So if you start simple is always better, and you can incrementally increase it and build your discipline over time. And I think simplicity is the key to sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways you do that, Daniel, is through your deep health audit, which you created as a detailed report and a blueprint to help those you work with achieve optimal health. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about the deep health audit and what it's all about, my friend.
Absolutely, Kevin. So what I do for a lot of my clients is that we do either a lifestyle audit where they fill out a questionnaire and I interview them, and I understand, for example, what type of, how their sleep is, how they manage stress, what their diet is like, what their exercise regime is like, and overall what their mindset and the overall pressures that they deal with in life. And that gives me a very good overall view of this person and kind of a snapshot of where they need to start improving. So for example, if I start working with someone and I notice that they get 5 hours of sleep a night, but the rest of their areas, the life is good, quote unquote good, then the first thing that I want to work on is they're improving their quality of sleep, right? And so a lot of people might scoff at that and think, oh, well, that's basic. I know about sleep. But what a lot of people don't understand, Kevin, is that there's a big difference between hearing something and knowing something. Because you don't know something until it expresses itself in your behavior, and you do it on a regular basis. So while people might sit here and say, oh, I've heard about sleep, I know that I need to get more sleep. Well, are you getting more sleep on a regular basis? If you're not, then you've only heard it, you don't understand it and understand how important it is. Because I've had so many guys tell me, oh, well, yeah, I know I need to get more sleep. And then they get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night and they realize how much it changes their lives. So I'm a big believer in doing a health audit and really identifying the big levers, the big dominoes that we can pull, and the very simple ones. Because after doing this for so many years now, Kevin, I appreciate it's not about how many different supplements you can take or how many things. It's about how few things can we do that are really going to move the needle for you in a big way. And oftentimes we might do, if we need to, we might do blood tests or more comprehensive tests to get a really good laser clear snapshot of exactly what the client needs and to get the most out of our work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, I know you wrote a book called Optimize Under 35. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about the book, what inspired you to write it, and what can people expect if they pick it up, my friend?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So my the purpose behind me writing Optimized Under 35 was that I went through a journey of having low testosterone and everything that I went through, and ultimately decided to go on testosterone replacement therapy. And for a short while before I worked in investment banking, I worked at a hormone therapy clinic, and or TRT clinic. And what I discovered working at the TRT clinic, Kevin, was there were so many guys that were undergoing testosterone replacement therapy, but they didn't need to be on it. So they went on it thinking it was going to be the quick fix or magic pill. And oftentimes they would go on it when in reality, what they really needed was to lose weight, improve their diet, exercise regularly, sleep better, all of which improve your natural testosterone levels, as opposed to going on to TRT, i.e. testosterone replacement therapy, which is a lifelong medication. So I think that so many men are so eager and quick to jump on TRT, i.e. a lifelong medication, when they don't necessarily need it. And part of my rationale or reasoning behind writing this book was to share my story of how I got low testosterone, what I experienced, and to counsel men to only go on TRT as a last resort, obviously under the supervision of a qualified doctor, and to try and avoid it and improve their hormonal profile naturally where possible.
Yeah, and Daniel, I'm wondering if we can talk for a moment about personal expectations, because I always tell people that the only level of personal expectations you have to reach are your own, because if you don't have a baseline of expectations, it's hard to, that you personally sort of construct for yourself. It's hard to rise to the level of anyone else's expectations. So I'm curious about your thoughts on setting personal expectations for yourself first before you worry about everybody else. How important do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, Kevin. And it's how I've always lived my life. So early on in my life, I think that I was conforming unknowingly to the expectations of other people. So I went to university. I got a very classic mainstream type career in investment banking, but deep down, I knew it wasn't what I really wanted for my life. I wanted to more time freedom, financial freedom, and I wanted to ultimately be my own boss. But I didn't know how because my parents were a teacher and a nurse, and so I never had that kind of education in my life or that kind of influence. So I kind of had to figure it out by myself. And I remember telling some of my colleagues when I wanted to quit investment banking that I was going to start my own business, and they were like, "Oh, well, you don't have anything lined up. It's kind of risky. You know, you shouldn't be doing that." And I thought to myself, well, yeah, it is a big risk, but I felt a lot more alive going after really what I wanted and going into the unknown than I'd ever felt in my life, as opposed to conforming and slowly dying a slow death, working in a soul-sucking environment that I knew I didn't really want to be doing deep down, but I did it because it was well paid and it was prestigious, but it wasn't really who I was deep down. And so it was eating away at me. And what I realized is that a lot of people who are working in those type of environments and those jobs or careers that they don't necessarily want to be doing, they're doing it for the money or because of the prestige or because of other people's expectations, but it slowly eats away at your soul. And you know, it's not what you want to be doing in life. So I think the highest call that you can ever have in life, much like you've something that you've been following yourself, Kevin, is to be true to yourself and share your gift with the world. And so the best expectations you can follow are your own. And I think if you always follow other people's expectations, you don't have the courage to follow your own. You always feel like there's something missing, and you won't really truly be happy.
Yeah, and to that point, Daniel, I know that you spend a lot of time helping your clients sort of with the practical side of fitness and coming up with practical strategies for fitness and life success. So I'm curious, when we talk about personal transformation and non-negotiables, I'm wondering if there are strategies or tips that you can provide to the audience today that are sort of universal. If they implement them in their lives, that they'll see a mindset mindset, and a culture shift in their life. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. So I think the biggest shift that people can make is to not impose too much pressure on themselves when starting a journey like this and getting into shape or having better health. Because what happens is, speaking of expectations, Kevin, people try to conform too much to other people's expectations or follow something that they heard on the internet, which is totally unfeasible or unreasonable for them. And what they don't realize is that they're following a very black and white template for how they should get in shape or live a healthy lifestyle. So, in other words, what I mean is people assume, because of what you see on the internet, they assume that the only way to get in shape is if you exercise for multiple days a week, 5, 6, 7 days a week. I mean, I only spend an hour and a half in the gym a week at most, at the absolute most. And because I know it's all about the quality, not the quantity of the workout. At the end of the day, your muscles don't know how long you spend in the gym. All they know is how hard that you work them. So if you can work them in a much shorter time period, why would you spend hours in the gym? So it's a fallacy that you have to spend all this time and effort and that you have to make health and fitness a second job, because it's not. So if people can get out of this perfectionist black and white mindset that health and fitness requires so much time and effort, otherwise it's pointless. I would say to yourself, if you're starting from zero, go to the gym once or twice a week. Keep it simple. But people don't start in the first place because they can't overcome this mental hurdle that they believe they need to spend all this time doing it. Well, don't spend all that time doing it, because if you're doing nothing, doing a little bit extra is going to be superior than doing nothing, right? But people get into this very black and white mindset that it's either got to be all or nothing. So I say to people, why don't you do a little bit extra from where you are right now? And then you can gradually and slowly, without pressure, increase it, right? You don't have to go from 0 to 100 within the space of a few seconds, right? And the same applies to your diet. Let's say that you're overeating, and you're eating McDonald's every day. Okay, if you're eating McDonald's 7 days a week, how can you cut it down to 6 days and then down to 5 days and gradually decrease the amount and do it in an easy, simple way? I had a client that I was working with who was smoking like a deck of cigarettes every single day when I first met him. And so I didn't tell him that he needed to go cold turkey on the cigarettes, because I've smoked cigarettes in the past and I know what it's like. So instead of trying to make it such a massive burden, what we did was we gradually decreased the amount that he would smoke. So over 1 week it was 20, and the other week it was 19. And now he's got down to 2 or 3 cigarettes a day. And that was because we gradually decreased them over time, and it was almost imperceptible. He didn't even really notice the difference because we did it gradually and slowly. So I think if more people had this tiered, gradual approach to their health, they would feel a lot healthier and feel better about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, Daniel, men have to, going back to the concept of personal accountability, you have to make the choice, I believe, to make your health a priority. For example, Daniel, one of the ways that I value fitness is I challenge myself to be at least 10 minutes active physically every day, whether I'm lifting weights, whether I'm walking, or whether I'm swimming. I try to do things at least 10 minutes a day. So my question to you from a physical perspective is, men really have to make it a priority in their life, because I really believe that you make time in life for the things you prioritize. Would you agree with that?
100%, Kevin. I think everyone listening or watching this podcast could say the same thing. So I think that ultimately a lot of men, they're not intellectually honest with themselves, and they hide behind too many excuses when it comes to getting in shape. I don't have the time, I work long hours. And the biggest one that I hear from most men is that they're a martyr, and that they want to spend time with their kids or their family, but what they're doing is they're using their family as an excuse for not being in shape or getting in shape, when the reality is that their family is going to be better off for them being in shape. So I think that a lot of men use family as something to hide behind, as an excuse. So they're not getting, even if you spend quality time, let's say quality time with them, they're not getting the best version of you guys, because you're falling asleep on the couch every night. You're not present because you're so tired and you're exhausted and you're out of shape. So I would say one of the best gifts that you can give your family, if you truly care about them, is to go to the gym on a regular basis, is to eat well, as opposed to using that as an excuse to, and being honest with yourself. If you don't have the time for it, or you can't make the time because you're busy, then the reality is that it's not really a priority and you don't really want it badly enough.
Yeah, and Daniel, one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was I looked at the world and I said, there has to be more that sort of brings us together than brings us apart. And I said I wanted to create bridges of unity and understanding. So as we sort of wrap up our conversation today, I'm curious to ask you, when you look at society today, Daniel, what's the one societal issue that you think frustrates you the most and you're most motivated to fix?
Great question. I mean, you could pick a list of things, Kevin, but I think that if we're going to start, ultimately, you are, like Gandhi said, right? You got to be the change that you want to see in the world. And I think that the best change that we could have in the world, if more people were fitter and healthier and they took care of their own physical health, we wouldn't have as many problems as we have in society. Because if you feel good about yourself, then you don't have to take it out on other people. Right. So I think that if society is getting increasingly more obese, so I think it's like over 50 or 60% of society right now, especially in the United States or in the UK, is becoming obese. So if we can help more people stay in shape in a simple way, rather than the common narrative right now, which is a very black and white mindset, which is either I'm not going to stay in shape, either I'm going to watch Netflix and do nothing, or I can do 5 days, 6 days a week, David Goggins, and go hardcore. I think there's a middle ground, which is more sustainable, easier, and less pressure and simpler for most people to follow. And if only more people understood that it was a lot simpler than they think, a lot more people would find it easier to stay in shape, I think. So I think that everything starts with you and your physical health, because physical and mental health go hand in hand. And so I think that having a society which is healthier and more grounded and happier is ultimately going to be better for everyone.
Yeah, and Daniel, my final question for you today has to do with your own personal and professional legacy and how you want that to be defined.
Yeah, so I think my own personal and professional legacy, Kevin, is ultimately that I want to be known for simplifying complex topics and making them very accessible and easy for people to understand, whether it's health and fitness, whether it's anything else. My goal is that I understand, I would say that I've studied health and fitness for many, many years. I've coached it and I understand it. And so many people are, they're caught between a rock and a hard place because they don't know how to discern all this information, because there's so much and it's overwhelming. So my goal is to be able to, because I've tried so many different things and I have a lot of experience, is to simplify the whole process and say, actually, you don't need to do all this stuff. Forget all this. Just focus on the things that matter. So I think if that was going to be my mantra for life, it's focus on the things that matter, the simple stuff, and the rest of life is a bit more easy and fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Daniel, tell me, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that, my friend?
Sure, Kevin. So if people want to find me on social media, you can find me on Twitter. My handle is at Daniel Kelly, Kelly 150. And if you want to find me on Instagram, my handle is Daniel Optimized with the Z. And if you want to reach out to me on my website is Daniel Kelly, Kelly.health.
Fantastic. Well, Daniel, I want to thank you for the work that you do to help people level up in their health and fitness and lifestyle journey. Your work in the space and time on my behalf today is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for being a great host, Kevin.